Blood dripped from her split lip onto the dry Montana soil as she pressed her back against the weathered barn wall, praying the darkness would swallow her whole. Elena Moore's bare feet were torn from miles of running, her dress ripped at the shoulder where he'd grabbed her, and every shallow breath sent pain shooting through her bruised ribs. She could still hear his voice echoing across the prairie. "You belong to me, girl," and knew that when he found her this time, he wouldn't let her live. Then footsteps approached from around the corner, and she closed her eyes, accepting her fate. But sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Stay with me until the very end of this journey, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Elena's story travels across the world. The footsteps stopped. Elena kept her eyes shut, her body trembling against the rough barn wood, waiting for the blow that would surely come. Her stepfather had found her before. 3 times she'd tried to run, and 3 times he'd dragged her back by her hair, his fists teaching her the cost of defiance. This time would be different. This time he'd said he was done teaching lessons. This time, she knew, would be the last. "Miss?" The voice wasn't his. It was deeper, quieter, carrying none of the rage she'd learned to recognize in the split second before violence erupted. Elena's eyes snapped open. A man stood 10 feet away, silhouetted against the dying light of sunset. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his face. His hand rested on his belt, near his gun, she noted with fresh terror. But he hadn't drawn it. He stood perfectly still, as if afraid any sudden movement might spook her like a wild animal. "You're hurt," he said simply. Elena tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, her vocal cords too damaged from screaming. She managed only a broken sound that might have been a word or might have been a sob. Her fingers clawed at the barn wall behind her, searching for something to hold on to, some way to keep standing when her legs wanted to collapse. The man took a single step forward. Elena flinched so violently she cracked her head against the barn siding. He stopped immediately, raising both hands where she could see them. "Easy now," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle tone she'd heard ranch hands use with frightened horses. "I'm not going to hurt you. This is my property, my barn you're leaning against, and I'm guessing you didn't come all this way just to admire the architecture." Despite everything, despite the pain and terror and exhaustion threatening to drag her under, Elena felt something like a laugh catch in her chest. It came out as a wheezing cough that sent fresh agony through her ribs. The man's jaw tightened. Even in the fading light, she could see his expression shift from cautious concern to something harder, angrier. But the anger wasn't directed at her. She'd learned to read rage, to anticipate it, and this wasn't that. This was something else. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Elena shook her head. Speaking would make it real. Saying the words out loud would mean acknowledging that she'd failed again, that she wasn't strong enough or smart enough or brave enough to escape the monster who'd married her mother and inherited her like furniture when consumption took the only person who'd ever loved her. "All right," the man said after a moment. "You don't have to tell me. But I'm Caleb Turner, and this is my ranch, and the sun's going down fast. Gets cold out here at night, even in summer. You need help, and I'm offering it. No strings, no questions you don't want to answer. Just a safe place to rest." Safe. The word was almost funny. Elena had learned there was no such thing as safe. Her mother's house hadn't been safe. The sheriff's office in town hadn't been safe. He'd just told her to go home and obey her stepfather like a dutiful daughter. The church hadn't been safe. The Reverend had suggested she pray harder and submit more cheerfully. Nowhere was safe. But she was so tired, so impossibly bone-deep tired. "I can see you thinking," Caleb said, and she detected the faintest hint of something that might have been kindness in his voice. "Trying to decide if I'm another wolf in man's clothing. That's smart. You should be cautious. But I'll make you a deal. You come up to the house, get cleaned up, have something to eat, and you can keep my hunting knife in your hand the whole time. First sign I'm anything other than what I say I am, you use it. Fair?" Elena stared at him, trying to process this strange proposal. Men didn't offer women weapons to use against them. Men didn't offer help without expecting payment. Men didn't speak to her like she was a person capable of making choices. "Why?" she managed to croak, the words scraping out through her damaged throat. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "My sister," he finally said. "She ran from a bad situation too, about 5 years back. Made it 3 days before they found her in a ditch. Sometimes I wonder if things might have been different if someone had helped her instead of looking the other way." He adjusted his hat, and Elena caught a glimpse of his face, weathered, strong-featured, with eyes that held old grief. "Can't change what happened to Sarah, but I can help you, if you'll let me." The truth of it settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. This man understood. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize the desperation in a woman running for her life. Enough to offer help without demanding explanation. She pushed away from the barn wall, swaying on her feet. The world tilted sickeningly, and she would have fallen if Caleb hadn't closed the distance in 3 quick strides, catching her elbow with surprising gentleness. "Easy," he said again. "When's the last time you ate?" Elena tried to remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had blurred into an endless cycle of running and hiding and running again. "That long, huh?" Caleb said, reading her silence correctly. "Come on. House is just over the rise. Can you walk, or should I carry you?" "Walk," Elena whispered fiercely. She'd crawl on her hands and knees before she'd let another man carry her anywhere. She'd learned what happened when you let yourself be carried. Caleb seemed to understand. He kept his hand under her elbow, supporting but not controlling, and matched his pace to her limping steps. Every movement sent pain shooting through her body, but Elena gritted her teeth and kept moving. Pain meant she was still alive. Pain meant she hadn't given up yet. The ranch house appeared as they crested a small hill. It was modest but well-maintained, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch and warm light glowing through the windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Elena could smell something cooking. Her stomach twisted with hunger so intense it was almost painful. "I've got a housekeeper," Caleb explained as they approached. "Mrs. Chen? Her husband works for me, and she keeps the place running. She'll help you get cleaned up. She's good people, won't ask questions, won't gossip." A Chinese woman appeared in the doorway as they approached, her face creasing with concern when she saw Elena's condition. She spoke rapidly in her native language. Elena couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. It was the sound of a woman who'd seen too much suffering and wouldn't tolerate more. "Take her to the spare room," Caleb said. "Draw a bath, find her some clothes. I'll bring food up, Mrs." Chen nodded, reaching for Elena's hand. Her touch was warm and firm and completely lacking in threat. Elena let herself be led inside, too exhausted to resist anymore. The house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and curtains on the windows. A fire burned in the hearth, and the table was set for supper. It looked like a home, the kind Elena had never really had. Mrs. Chen guided her down a short hallway to a small bedroom. It held a simple bed with a quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. Nothing fancy, but it was private and clean and had a door with a lock on the inside. Elena's fingers trembled as she touched the lock mechanism. While Mrs. Chen bustled out to prepare a bath, Elena sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, softer than anything she'd slept on in months. She wanted to lie down and never get up, but blood and dirt still covered her dress, and she couldn't bear to soil this clean space with the evidence of her trauma. Mrs. Chen returned with steaming buckets of water, filling a large metal tub that she'd somehow maneuvered into the room. She gestured for Elena to undress, then tactfully turned her back, humming softly while she arranged towels and a clean shift on the dresser. Elena stripped slowly, each movement revealing new bruises, new evidence of her stepfather's rage. Her arms were mottled purple and green. Her ribs showed dark marks where his boots had connected. Her back was striped with welts from his belt. When she finally lowered herself into the hot water, Elena couldn't stop the tears that came. The heat stung her wounds but also soothed her aching muscles, and the contrast was almost too much to bear. She scrubbed at her skin with the bar of soap Mrs. Chen had provided, trying to wash away not just the dirt and blood, but the memory of every unwanted touch, every violation, every moment she'd been treated as less than human. Mrs. Chen helped her wash her hair, gentle fingers working through tangles and scratches on her scalp. The older woman clucked sympathetically but didn't ask questions, just as Caleb had promised. When Elena was clean, Mrs. Chen helped her into the shift in a simple brown dress that was too large but serviceable. She wrapped Elena's torn feet in clean bandages and brushed out her hair with careful strokes. A knock on the door made Elena jump, her heart racing, but it was only Caleb's voice. "Food's outside the door. I'll leave it there." Mrs. Chen opened the door after waiting a moment, retrieving a tray laden with soup, bread, and hot tea. She set it on the bedside table and gestured for Elena to eat, then quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Elena ate slowly at first, then faster as her body remembered its desperate need for sustenance. The soup was rich and hearty, the bread fresh and soft. She ate every bite, drained the teacup, and felt some small measure of strength return to her limbs. A soft knock came again. "You decent?" Caleb called through the door. "Yes," Elena answered, her voice still hoarse but stronger than before. Caleb entered, carrying the hunting knife he'd mentioned earlier. He laid it on the dresser, well within her reach, then took up a position near the door, close enough to talk, far enough to not be threatening. "Feel better?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Thank you," she managed. I can't pay you for this." "Didn't ask you to," Caleb said. "Though I do need to know one thing. Is someone coming after you?" Elena's hands clenched in her lap. The moment of truth. "Yes," she whispered. "Family. Stepfather. Walter Moore. He has a farm about 30 miles east of here, near Dawson Creek." Caleb's expression didn't change, but Elena saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I know the name," he said quietly. "Know the reputation, too. Man drinks heavy and has a temper." "He killed my mother," Elena said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Not directly. She had consumption. Everyone knew that. But he made her last month's hell, worked her until she couldn't stand. She begged him to let me go, to send me to my aunt in Denver, but he said I was his property now, that I owed him for her debts." "You don't owe him anything," Caleb said firmly. "A man doesn't own his wife, and he sure as hell doesn't inherit his stepdaughter like cattle." "The law doesn't see it that way," Elena said bitterly. "I went to Sheriff Morrison. He told me to go home and be obedient. Said Walter had rights as my guardian until I'm 21 or married." "How old are you now?" 19. 2 more years of being his property. Elena laughed, a broken sound with no humor in it. "Unless he kills me first. He said he would this time. Said he was done with my running, that I'd caused him enough trouble and expense." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "He'll come looking," he finally said. "Man like that won't let go easily." "I know." Elena met his eyes steadily. "I'll leave tomorrow. I shouldn't have stopped here at all, but I just couldn't run anymore." "Where will you go?" Elena shook her head. "I don't know. Somewhere he can't find me. Maybe west to California. Maybe north to Canada." "Alone? With no money, no supplies, no horse?" Caleb shook his head. "You wouldn't make it a week. The frontier's dangerous for a woman traveling solo, especially one who's injured." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Elena demanded, frustration and despair warring in her chest. "Just wait here for him to find me? Let him drag me back to that farm and finish what he started?" "No," Caleb said slowly. "There might be another way. Not a pleasant one, maybe, but it would be legal, and it would put you beyond his reach permanently." Elena's heart began to pound. "What way?" Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Marriage. If you're married, you're no longer under his guardianship. The law would recognize your husband's claim over his." The room seemed to spin. "Marriage? To who? I don't know anyone who—" She stopped, understanding dawning. "You?" "In name only," Caleb said quickly. "A legal arrangement, nothing more. You'd have a safe place to live, food to eat, protection from Walter Moore. I wouldn't demand anything from you. You'd have your own room, your own space, your own life, just with legal papers that say you're under my protection instead of his." Elena stared at him, trying to process this impossible proposal. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. I could be a thief, a liar, anything." "Could be," Caleb agreed, "but I don't think you are. And even if you were, it wouldn't matter much. I've got a ranch to run and not much use for a wife in the traditional sense anyway. I eat simple food, keep simple hours, don't much care about fancy things or social niceties. Having someone here who could help Mrs. Chen with the household, maybe teach some of the ranch kids their letters, that would be useful. And keeping you safe from a man who beats women? He shrugged. That just seems like the right thing to do. You don't even know if I can read, Elena pointed out, her mind racing through the implications of his offer. Can you? Yes. My mother taught me before she got sick. I can write too, and do figures. There you go, more than most folks around here. Caleb adjusted his hat. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Sleep on it. Think it through. The offer stands until Walter Moore shows up, however long that takes. But when he does come, and he will, you'll need to have made a choice. Elena's mind whirled with possibilities and dangers. Marriage meant protection, yes, but it also meant binding herself to another man, another set of expectations and demands. How could she know Caleb Turner was what he seemed? How could she trust that his gentle manner wasn't just another mask hiding cruelty underneath? But what other choice did she have? Running would get her killed, or worse. Staying unmarried would mean Walter could legally reclaim her. At least this way, she'd have some measure of security. And Caleb was right. She could judge his character better from inside his household than from the road. I need time, she finally said. You've got it, Caleb replied. He stood, moving toward the door. Get some rest. Mrs. Chen will bring breakfast in the morning. We can talk more then. He left, closing the door behind him. Elena heard his footsteps fade down the hallway, then the sound of him settling in another part of the house. She sat in the quiet room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind whistling under the eaves, the crackle of the fire in the main room. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. So different from the constant tension and terror of her stepfather's farm. Elena reached for the hunting knife Caleb had left on the dresser. It was well-maintained, sharp, balanced for both utility and defense, a weapon that could save her life if she needed it to. She placed it under her pillow, within easy reach, then climbed into the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled of lavender. The quilt was heavy and warm. The door had a lock she could control. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena allowed herself to relax. Not completely, she'd probably never completely relax again, but enough to let exhaustion pull her under. She dreamed of her mother, young and healthy, laughing in a garden full of wildflowers. In the dream, her mother took her hand and said, "Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing, Elena. You'll know when the moment comes." Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back. The running, the barn, Caleb Turner's impossible offer. She dressed slowly, every muscle protesting the previous day's exertion. Her feet still hurt despite the bandages, and her ribs ached with each breath. But she was alive. She was clean. She was, for this moment at least, safe. In the kitchen, Mrs. Chen had laid out a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. Caleb sat at the table reading a newspaper, but he looked up when Elena entered and gestured to the empty chair. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months," Elena admitted, taking her seat. The food was excellent, and she ate with better appetite than she'd had in ages. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Caleb set down his coffee cup and looked at her seriously. "Been thinking," he said, "about your situation. If you're agreeable to the marriage idea, we should do it soon. Walter Moore's probably been searching for you for days now. Won't be long before he thinks to check neighboring ranches." Elena's stomach clenched. "How soon?" "Today, if possible. I can ride into town, talk to Reverend Matthews. He'll do the ceremony quiet-like, no fuss. We'll file the papers with the county clerk, make it legal and official." "That fast?" Elena's head spun. "Law's pretty straightforward about it. We're both of age, both unmarried, both willing. That's all that matters legally." He paused. "The question is whether you're willing." Elena stared at her plate, her mind racing through every possible outcome. If she refused, she'd have to leave today, risk the road alone, probably die in some ditch like Caleb's sister. If she accepted, she'd be binding herself to a stranger, trusting that his kindness was genuine and not just another trap. but she'd been watching him carefully since she woke up. Watched how he moved, confident but not aggressive. Watched how he spoke, direct but not demanding. Watched how Mrs. Chen treated him, with respect but no fear. Watched how the ranch hands greeted him when they passed by the window, with easy camaraderie, not the forced deference of men afraid of their boss. Everything she'd observed suggested Caleb Turner was exactly what he appeared to be, a decent man trying to do right by someone in need. "You promise," Elena said slowly, looking up to meet his eyes, "that this would just be on paper? That you wouldn't expect anything else?" "I promise," Caleb said steadily. "You'll have your own room, your own life. I won't touch you, won't demand anything from you. If you want to leave someday, if you find someone you actually want to marry or just want to strike out on your own, we can end the arrangement. I won't hold you prisoner here." "Why would you let me leave? Once we're married, I'd be legally yours." "Because I'm not Walter Moore," Caleb said simply. "I don't want to own anyone. I just want to help." Elena took a deep breath, thinking of her mother's dream words. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. "All right," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb nodded once, as if she'd just agreed to help with the harvest rather than changing both their lives forever. "I'll saddle up and head to town. Should be back by early afternoon. We can do the ceremony here at the house. Keep it private." He stood, then paused. "Elena, you're making a brave choice. I know it might not feel that way right now, but you are. Takes courage to accept help." Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with Mrs. Chen in a future she couldn't quite comprehend. The hours crawled by. Elena helped Mrs. Chen with simple tasks around the house, grateful for the distraction. The older woman taught her where things were kept, how Caleb liked his coffee, which chickens were the best layers. Normal, domestic information that felt surreal given what was about to happen. Around 2 in the afternoon, they heard horses approaching. Elena's heart leaped into her throat, terror flooding through her. Was it Walter? Had he found her already? But it was Caleb, accompanied by an elderly man in dark clothes who could only be the Reverend. They dismounted, and Caleb led the Reverend inside. "Elena Moore, this is Reverend Matthews," Caleb said formally. "Reverend, this is the young lady I told you about." The Reverend was ancient, with kind eyes and gentle hands that trembled slightly as he opened his Bible. "Mr. Turner has explained your situation," he said quietly. "I want you to know that you have my complete discretion. What happens here stays here." "Thank you," Elena whispered. The ceremony was brief and simple. They stood in the main room with Mrs. Chen and her husband as witnesses. Reverend Matthews asked the traditional questions. Caleb answered in his steady, quiet voice. When it was Elena's turn, she heard herself say, "I do," as if from a great distance. Caleb produced a simple gold band, his mother's, he explained quietly, and slipped it onto Elena's finger. It was slightly too large, but it would do. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said. He looked at Caleb expectantly. Caleb looked at Elena, a question in his eyes. She gave the tiniest shake of her head. He nodded almost imperceptibly and turned back to the Reverend. "Thank you, Reverend," he said, extending his hand for a shake instead of kissing his new bride. Papers were signed, witnessed, and filed. Reverend Matthews accepted Caleb's payment with murmured blessings and left as quietly as he'd come. Just like that, Elena Moore became Elena Turner, wife of a rancher she barely knew. That evening, they ate dinner in continued silence. When the meal was finished, Caleb stood and stretched. "Well, Mrs. Turner," he said, and Elena flinched at hearing her new name spoken aloud. "I've got early morning chores. I'll bid you good night." He disappeared down the hall to his room. Elena heard the door close, heard, significantly, that he didn't lock it, trusting her to trust him. She went to her own room, locked her door, and sat on the bed with the hunting knife in her lap. She'd done it. She was married. Protected by law from Walter Moore's guardianship. Safe, at least for now. But as she lay down to sleep that night, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just traded one cage for another, even if this one had better food and a kinder keeper. Freedom, real freedom, still felt like an impossible dream. Outside her window, the Montana night stretched vast and dark. Somewhere out there, Walter Moore was searching, and when he found out what she'd done, his rage would be terrible indeed. The confrontation was coming. The only question was when. The first morning, as Mrs. Caleb Turner, Elena woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, her body tensing for the familiar dread of her stepfather's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Then she saw the clean white curtains, felt the soft quilt, remembered the gold band on her finger. She was married. The thought still seemed impossible. Elena dressed slowly, her body still aching from the injuries that would take weeks to fully heal. When she emerged from her room, she found the house empty except for Mrs. Chen, who smiled and gestured toward the breakfast she'd prepared. "Mr. Turner?" Elena asked hesitantly. Mrs. Chen pointed toward the window. Through it, Elena could see Caleb in the distance, working with several ranch hands to repair a section of fence. He moved with easy confidence, his shirt already dark with sweat despite the early hour. The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn and worked until sunset, coming in only for meals that he ate quickly and quietly. He was unfailingly polite, asking Elena how she was feeling, if she needed anything, but he never pressed for conversation. After dinner, he would sit on the porch with his pipe while Elena helped Mrs. Chen with the dishes. Then he'd retire to his room and close the door. They lived like polite strangers sharing a house. A week passed, then two. Elena's bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. Her feet healed. Her ribs stopped aching with every breath. Physically, she was recovering. But the tension never left her shoulders. The fear never fully released its grip on her heart. Every sound made her jump. Every unfamiliar horse on the horizon made her run to the window, certain it was Walter come to drag her back. Caleb noticed, though he said nothing at first. But on the third week of their marriage, as they sat at dinner, he finally spoke. "You can't live like this," he said quietly. Elena's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Like what?" "Like a rabbit waiting for the hawk. You barely sleep. I can hear you pacing at night. You won't go outside unless Mrs. Chen is with you. You flinch every time a door closes." He met her eyes across the table. "I know you're afraid he'll come, but you can't let that fear cage you worse than he ever did." "Easy for you to say," Elena shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness in her voice. "You're not the one he wants to kill." "No," Caleb agreed. "But I am the one who'll stand between you and him when he shows up. And he will show up, Elena. Man like Walter Moore doesn't just let go. So the question isn't if he'll come, it's whether you'll be ready when he does." Elena set down her fork, her appetite gone. "How am I supposed to be ready? I can't fight him. I tried that. It only made things worse." "You don't have to fight him. That's my job now." Caleb pushed back from the table and walked to a cabinet in the corner. He returned with a small revolver, placing it on the table between them. "But you should know how to protect yourself anyway. Tomorrow, I'll teach you to shoot." Elena stared at the gun as if it were a snake. "I don't want to touch that." "I understand, but wanting and needing are different things." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to know you're not helpless. You need to know that if the worst happens, you can defend yourself. That knowledge might be what finally lets you sleep at night." Elena reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She'd never held a gun before. Her stepfather had kept his rifles locked away, tools of power he would never share with someone he considered property. "All right," she whispered, "teach me." The next morning, Caleb led her to a clearing behind the barn where he'd set up a row of tin cans on a fence post. He showed her how to hold the revolver, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "Don't be afraid of the kick," he said, standing close behind her to adjust her stance. Elena tensed at his proximity, and he immediately stepped back, giving her space. "It'll jump in your hand, but if you're holding it right, it won't hurt you." The first shot went wide, the crack of the gunshot making Elena's ears ring despite Caleb's warning. The second hit dirt 5 feet from the target, but the third knocked a can clean off the post. "There," Caleb said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. "You're a natural." They practiced for an hour each morning after that. Elena found herself looking forward to these sessions, not just for the skills she was gaining, but for the time with Caleb. He was patient, encouraging, never condescending. When she hit a target, he'd nod with satisfaction. When she missed, he'd help her adjust and try again. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked one morning after she'd hit 4 cans in a row. "Teaching me, protecting me, asking nothing in return." "Men don't do that." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, reloading the revolver with practiced efficiency. "Some men don't," he finally said. "But not all men are the same, Elena, just like not all women are the same. You've known cruel men, violent men. That doesn't mean we're all like that." "Your sister," Elena said softly. "The one who died. What happened to her?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he answered. "Sarah was 17. Fell in love with a ranch hand our father disapproved of. Said the boy had no prospects. So Sarah ran off with him, thinking love would be enough." He paused, checking the revolver's chamber. "Turns out the boy was everything our father feared and worse. Drank, gambled, hit her when he was angry. By the time she realized her mistake, she was too ashamed to come home. She tried to run, made it 3 days before he caught up to her." His voice went flat. "They found her body a week later." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "So am I. Every day." Caleb handed her the reloaded gun. "I can't save Sarah, but I can make sure the same thing doesn't happen to you. That has to count for something." That afternoon, as Elena helped Mrs. Chen hang laundry, she saw a rider approaching in the distance. Her heart seized, and she dropped the sheet she'd been holding. "Elena?" Mrs. Chen touched her arm with concern. But as the rider drew closer, Elena saw it wasn't Walter. It was a young man wearing a sheriff's badge. Sheriff Morrison himself, his weathered face grim as he dismounted. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Sheriff, what brings you out this way?" "Need to talk to you, Turner. Privately." Morrison's eyes flicked to Elena, and she saw something in his expression that made her stomach drop. Pity. He looked at her with pity. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my wife," Caleb said evenly. "Your wife?" Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "I heard rumors you'd married, but I didn't credit them. When did this happen?" 3 weeks ago. Elena Moore, Elena Turner now, is under my protection, legally and in every other way." Morrison's expression hardened. "That's what I came about. Walter Moore's been in town making accusations. Says his stepdaughter ran off with some of his money and valuables. Says she's a thief and he wants her back to face justice." Elena's vision swam. Of course. Of course Walter would twist the story, make himself the victim. "That's a lie," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't take anything. I barely escaped with the clothes on my back." "Can you prove that?" Morrison asked, not unkindly, but not sympathetically either. "Can he prove she did take anything?" Caleb countered. "Or is this just the word of a man angry that his punching bag escaped?" Morrison's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation, Turner." "So is calling my wife a thief?" Caleb moved to stand beside Elena, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. "Sheriff, I'll ask you plain. Are you here to arrest her?" "No," Morrison admitted. "But Moore is making noise about pressing charges. He's also making noise about the marriage. Says it's not legal since she was his ward and didn't have his permission." "She's 19, Caleb said flatly. "She doesn't need his permission, and we were both unmarried adults who consented freely. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and the papers are filed with the county. Everything's legal and proper." "Moore says you coerced her. That she couldn't possibly have agreed to marry you freely after only knowing you a few days." "And what do you say, Mrs. Turner?" Morrison asked, turning to Elena. "Did this man force you into marriage?" Elena's hands clenched at her sides. Here was her chance to speak truth, to tell someone with authority exactly what Walter Moore had done to her. But she'd tried that before, hadn't she? She'd gone to Morrison's office covered in bruises, and he'd told her to go home and be obedient. "No," she said clearly. "Caleb Turner has shown me nothing but kindness and respect. I married him of my own free will to escape a man who beat me, threatened to kill me, and treated me like property. If you want to know about coercion, Sheriff, ask Walter Moore how he convinced my mother to sign over all her property to him before she died. Ask him how he convinced me to stay at his farm after she passed." Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's between you and your stepfather." "No," Caleb said, his voice hard. It's not. She's my wife now. Whatever Moore wants to say, whatever accusations he wants to make, he'll have to go through me. And I'm telling you right now, he's not welcome on this property. If he sets foot on my land, I'll treat him like any other trespasser. That sounds like a threat, Turner. It's a promise. I protect what's mine. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, some unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Morrison sighed and turned toward his horse. I'll tell Moore the marriage is legal, he said. I'll tell him Mrs. Turner is under your protection now, but this isn't over. Man like Moore doesn't let go easy, and he's got friends in town who'll back his story. Let him come, Caleb said quietly. We'll be ready. After Morrison rode away, Elena felt her knees give out. She sank onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Caleb sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. You did well, he said. I'm terrified, Elena admitted. He's not going to accept this. He's going to keep pushing until nothing, Caleb interrupted firmly. You're my wife in the eyes of the law. He has no claim on you anymore, and if he tries to take you by force, he'll have to go through me and every man on this ranch. Why are they loyal to you? Elena asked suddenly. You're ranch hands. I've been watching them. They don't fear you, but they'd follow you into hell. Why? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Because I treat them fair. Pay them honest wages. Give them decent food and housing. Listen when they have problems. Most of them came from situations like yours, running from something or someone. I gave them a chance to start over. No questions asked. They know I'd stand up for them just like I'm standing up for you. You're a good man, Caleb Turner, Elena said softly. I'm just a man trying to do right, he replied. Not always succeeding, but trying. That evening, Caleb called a meeting of his ranch hands. Elena watched from the porch as he explained the situation, that her stepfather might try to cause trouble, that everyone should be alert for strangers on the property. An older ranch hand named Pete spoke up. We'll keep watch, boss. Anyone comes looking for trouble, they'll find more than they bargained for. The others nodded agreement, their faces grim and determined. Elena felt something shift in her chest. These men, strangers all, were willing to defend her simply because Caleb had asked them to, because she was one of them now, part of this odd family of misfits and refugees. The days that followed were tense. Elena continued her shooting lessons, getting better with each session. Caleb taught her other things too, how to ride a horse properly, how to identify edible plants, how to read the weather signs in the sky, survival skills for a woman who might need to run again someday. I'm not planning to leave, Elena said one afternoon as he showed her how to saddle a horse. You know that, right? I know. But the world is unpredictable. Better to be prepared than helpless. Mrs. Chen began teaching Elena to cook, to preserve food, to manage a household. The older woman had warmed to her, and sometimes Elena caught her humming while they worked together, a sound of contentment that made something in Elena's chest ache with an emotion she couldn't name. One evening, a month after the sheriff's visit, Elena found Caleb on the porch after dinner, staring out at the darkening prairie. Can I sit? She asked. It's your porch too, he said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. I've been thinking, Elena said finally, about what I could do here, to contribute, beyond helping Mrs. Chen. You don't have to do anything, Caleb said. The arrangement was, I know what the arrangement was, but I'm here and I'm healed now and I need to feel useful. She took a breath. Some of the ranch hands have children. I saw them playing by the creek yesterday. None of them go to school. The nearest one is 20 miles away in town. Caleb turned to look at her, interest sparking in his eyes. You want to teach them? If you'd allow it, nothing formal, just basic reading and figures. Maybe in one of the unused outbuildings. We could set up a classroom of sorts. That's a fine idea, Caleb said slowly. Better than fine. Those kids deserve a chance to learn. Their parents would be grateful. Then I can do it? Elena, you're my wife. You don't need my permission to do good in the world. He smiled slightly. But yes, I'll help you set it up. We can convert the old storage shed. It's got good light and enough space for desks. Over the next week, they worked together to transform the shed. Caleb and some of the ranch hands built rough desks and benches. Elena cleaned and organized, creating a space that felt welcoming despite its humble origins. Mrs. Chen donated some old books she'd been saving, and Caleb rode into town to purchase slates and chalk. The morning Elena's school opened, 7 children showed up, ranging in age from 6 to 13. Their parents came too, cautious but hopeful, thanking her with rough sincerity. "You sure about this, ma'am?" asked Maria, whose 3 children were among the students. "Teaching's not easy work." "I'm sure," Elena said, and realized she meant it. Teaching filled something in Elena she hadn't known was empty. The children were eager, hungry for knowledge, and watching their faces light up when they mastered a new word or solved a problem made her feel purposeful in a way she never had before. Caleb would sometimes stop by during his rounds, leaning in the doorway to listen as Elena taught. Once she caught him smiling at the sight of the children bent over their slates, tongues sticking out in concentration. "You're good at this," he said later. "Natural teacher." "My mother taught me," Elena said, "before she got sick. I always thought I'd like to teach someday, but then—" She trailed off. "Then Walter Moore decided your future for you," Caleb finished. "Well, he doesn't get to decide anymore. You do." That night, Elena lay in her bed thinking about how her life had changed. 2 months ago, she'd been running for her life, convinced she had no future beyond survival. Now she had a home, a purpose, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The fear was still there. She still jumped at unexpected sounds, still checked the horizon for unwelcome riders, but it was getting smaller. The world was becoming bigger than her terror, fuller than her trauma. She thought about Caleb too, more than she probably should. He'd kept every promise he'd made that first night. He never entered her room uninvited, never touched her without cause, never demanded anything from her. But there was a gentleness in how he spoke to her, a thoughtfulness in how he anticipated her needs before she voiced them. He was, she was beginning to realize, the kind of man she'd never believed existed. The thought both comforted and terrified her. Another week passed in peaceful routine. Elena taught her students in the mornings, helped with household tasks in the afternoons, and spent evenings on the porch with Caleb, their conversations growing longer and easier as they learned each other's rhythms. She was teaching the children a geography lesson one morning when Pete burst into the schoolroom, his face grim. "Mrs. Turner, you need to come to the house, now." Elena's heart dropped. "What is it?" "Rider coming up the main road. Boss says you should be inside." The children sensed the tension, going quiet. Elena forced her voice to remain calm. "Class is dismissed for today. Go straight home and stay with your parents." She hurried toward the house, Pete keeping pace beside her. Caleb stood on the porch, his rifle held casually but ready, his expression hard. "Is it him?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Looks like," Caleb said. "Go inside with Mrs. Chen. Lock the door and don't come out until I say." "No." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "He's here because of me. I won't hide." Caleb turned to look at her, something fierce and protective flashing in his eyes. "Elena." "I won't hide," she repeated. "Not anymore." The rider crested the hill, and Elena's blood turned to ice. It was Walter Moore, his face red with rage even from a distance. Behind him rode 3 other men, all armed. He'd brought help. He'd come prepared for violence. "Well," Caleb said quietly, checking his rifle, "I guess it's time to settle this once and for all." Elena's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where she now kept the small revolver Caleb had given her. She'd hoped never to use it for anything but target practice. That hope, she realized as Walter Moore dismounted with murder in his eyes, was about to be tested. The confrontation she'd been dreading for 2 months had finally arrived. And despite the terror coursing through her veins, Elena found herself standing firm beside her husband, ready to face the monster from her past. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Walter Moore strode toward the porch with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. He was tall and thick-bodied, with hands like slabs of meat, and a face that might have been handsome once before drink, and cruelty had carved deep lines around his mouth. The 3 men behind him fanned out, hands resting on their gun belts in a way that left no doubt about their intentions. There's my wayward daughter, Walter called out, his voice carrying the false cheer of a showman. Been worried sick about you, girl. Came to take you home where you belong. Elena's fingernails dug into her palms, but she kept her voice steady. I have a home. This is it. And I'm not your daughter. I never was. Walter's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. Now that's an ungrateful thing to say after all I'd done for you. Taking you in after your mama died, keeping a roof over your head, food in your belly. And how do you repay me? Running off with my property, spreading lies about me to anyone who'll listen. The only lies here are coming from your mouth, Caleb said, his rifle still held loosely, but his finger near the trigger. My wife doesn't want to go with you more, and since she's legally married now, you've got no claim on her. So I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out before this gets ugly. Your wife? Walter laughed, a harsh bark of sound. That's rich. She's been your wife what? Couple months? And you expect me to believe she married you willingly? Girl's slow in the head, always has been. Wouldn't know a good decision if it bit her. That marriage ain't legal. She was under my guardianship, needed my permission. She's 19, Caleb replied. Old enough to make her own choices. And I've seen the records from when her mother died. You never filed legal guardianship papers, Moore. You just assumed ownership like she was livestock. Walter's face darkened. You calling me a liar in front of witnesses? I'm calling you exactly what you are, a man who beats women and thinks he can get away with it because nobody's stood up to you before. Caleb's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. Well, I'm standing up to you now. Leave my property. One of Walter's companions, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. That's mighty bold talk for a man outnumbered 4-1. As if in answer, Pete emerged from the barn with 2 other ranch hands, all carrying rifles. More men appeared from various buildings around the property, the smithy, the bunkhouse, the stable. Within moments, Walter's group was surrounded by a dozen armed men, all watching with hard eyes. Looks like the numbers ain't in your favor after all, Caleb said mildly. Last chance to leave peacefully. Walter's hand moved toward his gun, but the scarred man grabbed his arm. Boss, this ain't the play. Too many of them. I don't care how many there are, Walter snarled, shaking off the hand. That girl's mine, and I'm not leaving without her. I'm not a girl, Elena said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. And I'm not yours. I never was, even when my mother was alive. You don't own people, Walter. You never did. Your mama gave you to me, Walter said, his voice dropping to something uglier, more honest. Signed papers before she died. Said you'd work off her debts. My mother was dying and out of her mind with pain, Elena shot back. You got her to sign things she never would have agreed to if she'd been in her right mind. And even if she had given me to you, which she didn't, not really, those papers mean nothing now. I'm married, legally and properly married to Caleb Turner. You have no authority over me anymore. Walter's face twisted with rage. You little whore! I took you in, fed you, gave you a place to sleep, and this is how you repay me? By spreading lies and stealing from me? What did I steal? Elena demanded. Name one thing. I left with the clothes on my back and nothing else. Everything you owned is still at that farm, including the money you beat out of every hired hand who ever worked for you. You stole yourself, Walter said, taking a step forward. The ranch hands immediately raised their rifles, and he froze. You were mine to do with as I pleased until you turned 21, or I married you off. That was the law. That was the agreement. There was no agreement, Caleb interjected. There was a sick woman being coerced and a young girl being abused. And now there's a legal marriage that puts Elena under my protection. The law's clear on this, Moore. Sheriff Morrison himself confirmed it. You've got no case. Morrison's a fool who don't understand how things really work, Walter spat. Girl like her needs a firm hand, needs to be taught her place. You're too soft, Turner. Give her a few months and she'll run from you too. Or worse, she'll rob you blind and leave you looking like a fool. If she wants to leave, she can, Caleb said simply. I won't stop her. That's the difference between you and me. I don't need to chain someone to keep them. Walter's laugh was bitter. You think you're better than me? You think because you got a nice ranch and play the gentleman that you're somehow above the rest of us? You're a fool, Turner. That girl's poison. She destroyed her own mother with her laziness and complaining, drove her to an early grave with her constant demands. My mother died of consumption, Elena said, her voice shaking with fury now instead of fear. She got sick because you worked her 16 hours a day in all weather. She got sick because you wouldn't pay for a doctor when she first started coughing. She got sick because you'd rather spend money on whiskey than medicine. And when she was dying, when she was begging you to let me go to my aunt in Denver, you laughed in her face and told her I was payment for all the trouble she'd caused you. That's a lie. Is it? Elena took a step forward, and Caleb's hand twitched toward her but didn't stop her. Then why do you still have the bruises on your knuckles from the last time you hit me? Why did Sheriff Morrison see my face covered in blood when I came to him for help? Why did Doc Henderson write in his notes that my mother had broken ribs and burns on her arms 2 months before she died? Walter's face went purple. Doc Henderson's dead. Can't prove nothing from a dead man's notes. Actually, his widow kept all his medical journals, Caleb said. I rode into town last week and had a conversation with her. Very enlightening reading. She's willing to testify if this goes to court. Elena stared at Caleb, shock rippling through her. He'd been gathering evidence, building a case against Walter without telling her? The realization that he'd been protecting her even in ways she didn't know made something warm bloom in her chest. Walter seemed to realize he was losing ground. His hand moved toward his gun again, faster this time. I'm taking what's mine, and any man who tries to stop me will regret it. Draw that weapon, and you'll be dead before it clears the holster, Pete called out from his position near the barn. We got 8 rifles pointed at you right now, Moore. You ain't that fast. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched taut as a wire, and Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Walter's hand hovered over his gun, rage and calculation warring in his expression. Then hoofbeats sounded from the road, and everyone turned to see Sheriff Morrison riding up fast, his deputy beside him. What in blazes is going on here? Morrison demanded, taking in the armed standoff with a lawman's practiced eye. This man's trespassing on my property and threatening my wife, Caleb said calmly. I've asked him to leave. He's refused. That's so? Morrison looked at Walter. That true, Moore? This is a family matter, Walter said, trying to regain his composure. I came to collect my stepdaughter, who ran away with stolen property. Turner here's harboring a thief and a liar. Mrs. Turner's not your stepdaughter anymore, Morrison said tiredly. She's a married woman. And as for the theft charges, you never filed a formal complaint or provided a list of missing items. Just made a lot of noise in town about being wronged. I'm filing now, Walter said. She took a silver locket, $200 in cash, and my wife's wedding ring. Elena gasped. That's not true. I never touched any of those things. Prove you didn't, Walter sneered. Burden of proof's on you, Moore, Morrison said. And frankly, I'm getting tired of this whole situation. You've been in my office 3 times making complaints, but you never bring evidence, just accusations. What more evidence do you need than my word? Walter demanded. A lot more than that, Morrison said bluntly, especially since I got a letter yesterday from a Mrs. Sarah Henderson, Doc Henderson's widow, like Turner mentioned. She attached copies of her late husband's medical notes regarding both your wife and stepdaughter. Makes for disturbing reading, Moore. Real disturbing. Walter's face went from purple to white. That's private medical information. Can't be used against me. Can in a case of suspected abuse, the deputy spoke up, a young man Elena didn't know. And there's other witnesses, too. Woman named Martha Collins says she saw you drag Miss Elena, Mrs. Turner, by her hair across your yard last spring. Hired hand named Jim Raleigh says he quit your employ because he couldn't stomach watching you beat a young girl. They're all lying, Walter said, but there was desperation creeping into his voice now. Got together and made up stories to protect a thief. Or, Sheriff Morrison said, you're exactly what they say you are, and you came here today hoping to intimidate a woman into coming back to a place where you could keep abusing her without witnesses. He shifted in his saddle, his hand moving to rest on his own gun. I'm giving you one chance more. Ride out now, drop these false charges, and don't come near Mrs. Turner again. Do that, and we'll call this finished. And if I don't? Then I arrest you right now for trespassing, making terroristic threats, and we start investigating those abuse allegations properly. Could get real ugly for you, real fast. Morrison's voice hardened. I know I didn't help Mrs. Turner when she came to me before. That's on my conscience, and I'm trying to make it right. But if you push this, if you keep coming after her, I will put you in a cell and throw away the key. That's a promise. Walter looked around at the circle of armed men, at the sheriff's hand on his gun, at Elena standing straight and unafraid beside her husband. For the first time since he'd arrived, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. "This ain't over," he finally said. "Yeah, it is," Caleb replied. "You just haven't accepted it yet." Walter's companions were already backing toward their horses, clearly wanting no part of what might come next. The scarred man caught Walter's arm again. "Boss, we should go. This is a losing hand." For a moment, Elena thought Walter might actually draw his gun anyway, might choose death over losing control. She could see it in his eyes, that wild, desperate rage of a man watching his power crumble. But then he spat on the ground, a final gesture of contempt, and stalked back to his horse. "You'll regret this, Turner. All of you will regret this." "Only regret I got is not standing up to you sooner," Pete called out. Walter swung into his saddle, yanking his horse's head around with unnecessary force. "This ain't finished," he said, pointing at Elena. "You're going to come crawling back, girl. And when you do, don't expect any mercy." "I won't be coming back," Elena said quietly. "Not ever. Whatever power you had over me died the day I married Caleb Turner. You're nothing to me now, less than nothing." The words hit Walter like a physical blow. His face contorted with fury, and his hand dropped to his gun. Everything happened at once. Walter's gun cleared his holster. Caleb's rifle came up in one smooth motion. 8 other rifles swung to bear on Walter and his men. Sheriff Morrison shouted, "Don't do it!" Walter fired. The shot went wild, his horse dancing sideways at the noise. The bullet slammed into a porch post 2 feet from where Elena stood. She felt the spray of wood splinters across her face, but didn't move, didn't flinch. Then Caleb fired, and Walter's gun flew from his hand, blood spraying from his trigger finger. He howled in pain and rage, clutching his maimed hand to his chest. "Next one goes through your heart," Caleb said, his voice absolutely cold. "Try me." "I'm a witness to attempted murder," Sheriff Morrison said, riding forward with his own gun drawn. "Walter Moore, you're under arrest. Deputy, disarm him and his friends." The deputy moved quickly, collecting weapons while Walter cursed and bled and made threats that nobody was listening to anymore. His companions surrendered their guns without protest, clearly wanting nothing more to do with this disaster. "You can't do this," Walter snarled as the deputy bound his hands, carefully, given the injured trigger finger. "I got rights. I got property. You can't just arrest me on this whore's word." "I'm arresting you because you just tried to kill someone in front of a dozen witnesses," Morrison said. "That's attempted murder, Moore. That's a hanging offense. And once we start digging into how your wife really died, into all those complaints from former hired hands, into Doc Henderson's notes," he shook his head, "you're done. Your farm's going to auction to pay your legal fees, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll hang." The reality of it seemed to hit Walter all at once. His face went slack, the rage draining away to leave only a pathetic, broken man who'd finally pushed too far. "All this," he said, staring at Elena with something that might have been incomprehension. "All this over a worthless girl." "No," Caleb said, "all this because you couldn't let go of your need to control and hurt people weaker than you. My wife's worth more than you could ever understand." Sheriff Morrison hauled Walter toward his horse. "Get on. We got a long ride back to town, and I want you locked up before sunset." As they led Walter away, still cursing, still making threats, still unable to accept that his reign of terror had ended, the tension that had gripped the ranch finally broke. The ranch hands lowered their rifles, muttering among themselves. Pete let out a long whistle. "Well, that was more excitement than I bargained for when I signed on to punch cattle," he said. Caleb set his rifle against the porch railing and turned to Elena. "You all right?" She meant to say yes. She meant to be strong, to show everyone that she was fine, that Walter Moore hadn't broken her. But now that the danger had passed, now that the confrontation she'd been dreading for months was finally over, her legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, holding her steady as her whole body began to shake. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe. It's over." "He tried to kill me," Elena whispered. "He actually tried to kill me. And he failed, and now he's going to pay for everything he's done." Caleb's arms tightened around her, and for the first time since they'd married, Elena let herself lean into his embrace. "You're safe now, Elena. Truly safe. He can't hurt you anymore." Mrs. Chen appeared with water and a cloth, gently cleaning the scratches on Elena's face from the wood splinters. The older woman's hands were gentle, but her eyes were fierce, and she spoke rapidly in her native language, probably cursing Walter Moore to every hell she knew of. The ranch hands gradually dispersed, returning to their work but with a new energy, a sense of victory. They'd stood together against a bully and won. The story would be told around the bunkhouse fire for years to come. Caleb helped Elena into the house and onto the sofa, then poured her a glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink," he ordered. "It'll help with the shock." Elena drank, coughing at the burn, but grateful for the warmth spreading through her chest. Caleb sat beside her, close but not crowding, there but giving her space to process. "How long have you been gathering evidence against him?" Elena asked after a moment. "Since the day after we married," Caleb admitted. "I knew he'd come eventually, knew we'd need more than just our word against his if it came to a legal fight. So I rode into town, talked to Doc Henderson's widow, tracked down some of his former hired hands, built a case." He met her eyes. "I should have told you. I just didn't want you to worry more than you already were." "You were protecting me," Elena said softly. "Again. That's what husbands do. Or should do anyway. Real husbands, not monsters like Moore." Elena looked down at the gold band on her finger, thinking about everything that had happened since Caleb Turner had found her hiding behind his barn. He'd offered protection without asking for payment. He'd given her space to heal, taught her to defend herself, supported her dreams of teaching. He'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, willing to take a bullet to keep her safe. And he'd done it all while maintaining the boundaries they'd agreed to, never once demanding more than she was willing to give. "Caleb," she said quietly, "this marriage, it started as an arrangement, a way to protect me legally." "It did," he agreed, his voice carefully neutral. "But it's not just that anymore, is it?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. "No," he finally said. "Not for me, anyway. Hasn't been for a while now." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "When did it change?" "Honestly, I think it changed that first morning when I watched you push yourself to walk to the house, even though every step hurt. You were terrified and hurt and exhausted, but you refused to give up your dignity. Refused to let me carry you even though it would have been easier." He smiled slightly. "I've known a lot of people, Elena. Few of them had half your courage." "I don't feel courageous," Elena admitted. "I feel scared most of the time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Caleb turned to look at her fully. "You stood up to Walter today? Didn't hide? Didn't run? You faced him down even knowing he might kill you. That's the definition of courage." "I could do it because you were beside me," Elena said. "Because I knew I wasn't alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb's eyes searched her face, looking for something, permission, maybe, or confirmation that she felt what he felt. "Elena," he said carefully, "I need you to know that you don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not obligation, nothing. The protection I offered, the marriage, it's all freely given. If you want to keep things as they are, separate rooms and separate lives, I'll respect that. But if you want something different—" He trailed off. "What if I don't know what I want?" Elena asked honestly. "What if I'm too damaged to know the difference between gratitude and something more?" "Then we wait," Caleb said simply. "However long it takes. There's no rush, no pressure. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you choose to leave." Elena thought about the past 2 months, thought about the easy conversations on the porch, the way her heart lifted when she saw Caleb riding back from the far pastures, the hollow feeling in her chest on the rare occasions when he had to go into town overnight. She thought about how safe she felt in this house, how the nightmares had gradually faded, how she could sleep through the night now without startling awake in panic. She thought about how Caleb looked at her, not with the possessive hunger she'd seen in Walter's eyes, but with something warmer, steadier. Respect mixed with affection, patience mixed with longing. I'm not ready, she said finally, for everything. But I want to be. Someday. Someday works for me, Caleb said, and the relief in his voice made Elena smile despite everything. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Elena slept without locking her door. It was a small thing, a gesture of trust, but it felt monumental. The next morning, Sheriff Morrison returned with news. Walter Moore had been formally charged with attempted murder, assault, and a litany of other crimes. Several of his former employees had come forward with testimony, and Doc Henderson's widow had provided detailed medical records documenting years of abuse. He's looking at 20 years minimum, Morrison told them over coffee in the kitchen. More likely he'll hang. Depends on how the trial goes. Will Elena have to testify? Caleb asked. Probably, but you'll be there with her, and we've got enough other witnesses that her testimony's just supporting evidence. Morrison looked at Elena. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Turner. You came to me for help once, and I turned you away. That was wrong. I let my assumptions about how things should work override my duty to protect someone in danger. Why are you helping now? Elena asked. What changed? Morrison was quiet for a moment. My daughter, he finally said. She's about your age. A few weeks ago, she told me about a man in town who'd been bothering her, making her uncomfortable. And I realized that if she ever came to me bruised and bleeding like you did, I'd want someone to help her. I'd want someone to believe her. He shook his head. Can't change what I did, or didn't do, before. But I can make sure Walter Moore never hurts anyone again. After Morrison left, life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. Elena reopened her school, and the children returned with questions about the excitement they'd witnessed. She answered honestly but carefully, teaching them that standing up to bullies was right, but that violence should always be a last resort. The ranch hands treated her differently now, not with fear or even really with deference, but with the easy respect of people who'd stood together in battle. She was one of them now, in truth, not just by marriage, but by shared experience. And Caleb was still Caleb, patient, steady, giving her space while making it clear he'd be there whenever she was ready to close the distance between them. 3 weeks after Walter's arrest, a letter arrived from the territorial prosecutor. The trial was set for November. Elena would need to testify, but the case was strong even without her. Walter Moore, once a man who terrorized everyone around him with impunity, was facing justice at last. Elena stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the Montana prairie. Caleb joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and they stood together in comfortable silence. You thinking about the trial? He asked. Thinking about how strange life is, Elena said. 3 months ago, I was hiding behind your barn thinking I was about to die. Now I'm standing here planning to face my abuser in court and knowing I'll walk away alive afterward. Life can change fast, Caleb agreed, for good or bad. This was good, Elena said softly. Finding you, this place, this life. It's all good. She felt Caleb's hand brush against hers, tentative, asking permission. Elena turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his, holding on tight. They stood like that until the stars came out. 2 people who'd found each other at the worst possible moment and built something worth keeping from the ruins of trauma and fear. The past had come riding in with violence and threats, but it had left in chains and disgrace. The future was uncertain, as futures always are. But for the first time in her life, Elena Turner faced it without terror. She faced it with hope. The weeks following Walter's arrest passed with a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. Elena found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some new catastrophe to shatter the fragile normalcy she'd built. But the days kept arriving quiet and uneventful, filled with teaching and household routines and evening conversations with Caleb that stretched longer each night. The hand-holding on the porch had become regular now, a comfortable intimacy that asked nothing more than what it was. Sometimes Caleb's thumb would trace small circles on the back of her hand, an absent gesture that made Elena's heart skip in ways she was still learning to understand. One morning in late September, Elena was helping Mrs. Chen preserve the last of the summer vegetables when the older woman paused in her work and studied Elena with knowing eyes. "You different now," Mrs. Chen said in her careful English. "Not so afraid. More here." She tapped her own chest over her heart. Elena smiled, slicing another cucumber. I feel different. Safer, I suppose. Not just safe, Mrs. Chen said. Happy. You love him, yes? The knife slipped, nearly catching Elena's finger. That's not... We have an arrangement. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. Arrangement. She waved her hand. I see how you watch him. How he watch you. That not arrangement. That love. Just too scared to say. It's complicated, Elena protested weakly. Love always complicated, Mrs. Chen said with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through her own complications. But also simple. You want be with him? He want be with you? Everything else just details. Elena thought about that conversation all afternoon as she taught her students their arithmetic. Was it really that simple? Could she just choose to move forward, to let herself feel what she was feeling without analyzing every emotion for signs of dependence or trauma or gratitude masquerading as something more? That evening, Caleb came in from the range earlier than usual, dusty and tired, but with something bright in his eyes. Got news from Morrison, he said, washing his hands at the pump. Trial's been moved up to October 15th. Prosecutor thinks they've got enough evidence that it'll be quick. Elena's stomach clenched. That's less than 3 weeks. I know. Caleb dried his hands and turned to face her. I'll be right there with you the whole time. And Elena, you don't have to testify if you don't want to. They've got plenty without your testimony. No, Elena said firmly. I need to do this. I need to look him in the eye and tell the truth about what he did. For me, and for my mother, and for anyone else he might have hurt if I stay silent. Pride flickered across Caleb's face. You're the bravest person I know. I'm terrified, Elena admitted. That's what makes it brave. The days leading up to the trial passed too quickly and too slowly at once. Elena practiced her testimony with Caleb, going over the questions the prosecutor had sent in a letter. She forced herself to remember details she'd tried to forget. The specific beatings, the threats, the day her mother had died with Walter standing over her bed counting the hours until he could sell off her belongings. Caleb listened to all of it without flinching, though she saw his jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists. When she finally broke down crying halfway through describing the night she'd run, he pulled her into his arms and held her while she shook. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you, and I'm not letting go. Elena clung to him, breathing in the scent of leather and soap and something uniquely Caleb. In his arms, the memories lost some of their power. They were just events that had happened, not chains that still bound her. Thank you, she whispered when she could speak again. For what? For being exactly who you are. Elena pulled back just enough to look up at him. For never making me feel weak for being afraid. For standing beside me instead of in front of me. Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. Elena. He stopped, seemed to struggle with something, then continued. I need you to know that whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever you have to say or relive, you're not alone in it. Not anymore. Not ever again if I have anything to say about it. You won't leave? The question came out small and uncertain. Not unless you tell me to. His eyes were intense, serious. And even then, I'd probably argue. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, like a locked door finally swinging open. What if I never tell you to leave? What if I want you to stay forever? Caleb went very still. Is that what you want? I think it might be, Elena said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them. I'm still figuring out what I feel and why I feel it. But I know I don't want to imagine this life without you in it. I know I look forward to seeing you every morning and miss you when you're gone overnight. I know when you hold my hand, it feels like the safest place in the world. Elena. Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. I don't want to rush you. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything just because... This isn't about owing, Elena interrupted. This is about choosing. You told me once that you wouldn't hold me prisoner, that I could leave whenever I wanted. Well, I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm afraid to leave or because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. Caleb's forehead came to rest against hers, and they stood like that for a long moment, breathing together. I've been in love with you since the day you stood up to teach those children, he finally said. Watching you transform fear into purpose, watching you build something good out of all that pain, I've never seen anything more beautiful in my life. Elena's breath caught. You love me? With everything I am, Caleb said simply. But I need you to be sure, Elena. I need you to be certain that what you're feeling isn't just gratitude or safety or the comfort of having someone stand between you and danger. How do I know the difference? Elena asked honestly. Time, I suppose. And trust. Trust in yourself to know your own heart. He pulled back slightly to look at her. There's no rush. We can keep taking this as slow as you need. What if I don't want slow anymore? Elena heard herself say. What if I'm tired of being afraid of my own feelings? Then we'll figure it out together, Caleb said, one day at a time. That night, Elena left her door unlocked again, but this time it felt less like a gesture of trust and more like an invitation. She wasn't sure what she was inviting exactly. She still wasn't ready for everything that word marriage traditionally implied, but she was ready for something more than the careful distance they'd been maintaining. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house settling, wondering if Caleb was lying awake too, thinking about their conversation. The possibility made her heart race with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement, but somewhere beautifully in between. The next morning arrived with October rain cold and persistent. Caleb rode out anyway, needing to check on the cattle in the far pasture. He kissed Elena's forehead before he left, a quick, almost casual gesture that nevertheless left her touching the spot long after he'd gone. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course. She noticed everything. But she just smiled her knowing smile and said nothing, humming as she kneaded bread dough. Elena spent the day preparing for tomorrow's classes and trying not to count down the days until the trial. 11 more days. 11 days until she'd have to face Walter Moore across a courtroom and tell the whole ugly truth in front of strangers. Caleb returned at sunset, soaked to the bone and looking exhausted. Elena helped him out of his wet coat, then brought him coffee while he sat by the fire. 3 cows got loose through a break in the fence, he explained. Took most of the day to round them up and fix the damage. I'm getting too old for this. You're not old, Elena protested, settling into the chair beside him. 34 and feeling every year of it tonight. He smiled at her over his coffee cup. Though having someone care about whether I make it home safely makes the hard days easier. Of course I care, Elena said. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Caleb waited, patient as always, not pushing. I care very much, Elena finished quietly. More than I probably should after only 4 months. There's no should in how people feel, Caleb said. Feelings just are. The question is what we do about them. What do you want to do about them? Caleb set down his coffee cup and reached for her hand. I want to court you properly. Take you into town for dinner, maybe to the dance they hold at the community hall once a month. I want to give you flowers and compliments and all the things a woman deserves when a man's trying to win her heart. You've already won it, Elena said, then felt her eyes widen at her own boldness. Caleb's expression transformed, joy and wonder and disbelief all mixing together. Say that again. You've won my heart, Elena repeated, stronger this time. I don't know when exactly it happened, maybe when you first taught me to shoot, or when you stood beside me while Walter threatened us. Or maybe it was even earlier, but it's yours, Caleb Turner, if you want it. If I want it, Caleb repeated wonderingly. Elena, wanting your heart is like wanting the sun to rise. Inevitable, essential, the only thing that makes sense in a confusing world. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I love you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the gift you're giving me. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time, happy ones. I love you too, she whispered, testing the words out loud for the first time. I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to admit it. Not scared anymore? Terrified, Elena admitted, but doing it anyway. Caleb stood and gently pulled her to her feet. They stood facing each other in the firelight, hands clasped between them. Can I kiss you? He asked. Only if you're ready. We can wait if... Elena rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his careful words. The kiss was soft and sweet, and nothing like the brutal, unwanted touches she'd known before. This was choice, mutual desire, the beginning of something beautiful instead of the violation of something sacred. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers again. "We're really doing this," he said, "making this marriage real." "It was always real," Elena replied. "We just didn't know it yet." The days leading up to the trial took on a different quality after that. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now by happiness, by the knowledge that whatever happened in that courtroom, she'd be coming home to a husband who loved her not out of duty or obligation, but by choice. They were careful with each other, still learning the boundaries of this new intimacy. Caleb would kiss her goodbye in the mornings and hello in the evenings. They'd sit together on the porch with her leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Small touches throughout the day, a hand on her back as he passed, fingers brushing while handing off coffee cups. The casual intimacy of two people growing accustomed to sharing space and lives. Elena kept her own room, and Caleb never suggested otherwise. They both understood that some kinds of closeness would take more time, more healing. But Elena found herself spending more evenings in the main room, reading while Caleb worked on ranch accounts, comfortable in each other's silent company. One week before the trial, Pete knocked on the door after dinner with an unexpected visitor, a well-dressed woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Margaret Henderson, the doctor's widow. "I wanted to meet you before the trial," she explained, accepting the tea Mrs. Chen offered. "My husband documented what your stepfather did, but I want you to know that he felt guilty about it for years. He couldn't legally intervene. Walter Moore was your guardian, and the law protected his rights over yours. But it bothered him. He used to come home from that farm looking ill." "Why didn't he say something?" Elena asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. "He tried. Went to the sheriff, went to the town council. But your stepfather had friends in all the right places, and you were just a girl. Nobody wanted to believe a respectable farmer was beating his wife and stepdaughter." Margaret's face was sad. "My husband died believing he'd failed you. I'm testifying at this trial partly for justice, but partly for him, to finish what he couldn't." "Thank you," Elena said, touched by the woman's dedication. "Both for testifying and for keeping those records. I know they're difficult to read." "They are," Margaret agreed, "but they're also evidence of truth, and truth is what's going to put Walter Moore away for good." After Margaret left, Elena felt both comforted and unsettled. How many people had known? How many had seen what was happening and felt powerless to stop it? The thought was sobering. "That's why what you're doing matters," Caleb said that night as they sat together on the porch. "You're not just getting justice for yourself. You're proving that women like you can stand up and be heard. You're making it easier for the next person who needs to run." "I just want it to be over," Elena admitted. "I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to stop jumping at shadows. I want to just be happy without always waiting for disaster." "You will be," Caleb promised. "This is the last step, Elena. Once you testify, once the jury convicts him, you can finally close this chapter." The morning of October 15th arrived cold and clear. Elena dressed in her best dress, a dark blue one that Caleb had bought her for the occasion, saying every woman deserved to face her demons looking strong. Mrs. Chen braided her hair in an elegant crown, and when Elena looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the terrified, bruised girl who'd hidden behind the barn. In her place stood someone who'd survived the worst and found the courage to fight back. The ride to town took 2 hours. Caleb drove the wagon while Elena sat beside him, her hand gripped tightly in his. Pete and several other ranch hands rode alongside as an escort, a show of solidarity that made Elena's throat tight with gratitude. The courthouse was a simple wooden building, but it seemed imposing as they approached. A crowd had gathered, townspeople curious about the trial, reporters from the territorial newspaper, and several women Elena didn't recognize but who nodded at her with understanding in their eyes. Other survivors, perhaps. Other women who'd lived through similar hells. Sheriff Morrison met them at the door. "Mrs. Turner. Mr. Turner. The prosecutor's waiting inside. Trial starts in 30 minutes. The prosecutor was a thin, intense man named James Crawford, who'd traveled from the territorial capital specifically for this case. He went over Elena's testimony one more time, gentle but thorough. "He's going to try to shake you," Crawford warned. "His defense attorney will imply you're lying, that you wanted his money or attention, that you somehow provoked the abuse. You need to stay calm and stick to the facts. Can you do that?" Elena thought about all the times Walter had called her worthless, stupid, a burden. Thought about how she'd once believed those words, but she wasn't that person anymore. "I can do it," she said firmly. The courtroom filled quickly. Elena sat in the front row with Caleb beside her, his presence a steady anchor. When they brought Walter in, shackled and wearing prison clothes, Elena felt her breath catch. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Without his farm, his authority, his power to terrorize, he was just a pathetic middle-aged man facing the consequences of his cruelty. His eyes found hers across the courtroom, and she saw the rage still burning there. But she also saw fear. He was afraid of what she might say, afraid of losing control of the narrative he'd built around himself. Elena lifted her chin and stared back, unblinking, until Walter looked away first. The trial began with opening statements. Crawford laid out the case methodically: the abuse, the threats, the attempted murder. Walter's attorney, a bored-looking man who'd clearly taken the case for the money, argued that this was a family dispute blown out of proportion by a hysterical girl and an overprotective husband. Then the witnesses began. Margaret Henderson testified first, reading from her husband's medical notes in a clear, steady voice. Descriptions of broken bones, burns, bruises, documentation of a pattern of violence spanning years. Former ranch hands testified next, describing the fear everyone felt around Walter Moore, the drinking, the rages. One man broke down crying as he described hearing Elena screaming one night and being too afraid to intervene. Sheriff Morrison testified about the day Walter had tried to shoot Elena, his voice professional but his disgust evident. And then it was Elena's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that only trembled slightly. The bailiff swore her in, and she placed her hand on the Bible, taking a deep breath. Crawford approached with a kind smile. "Mrs. Turner, please tell the court how you came to live with Walter Moore." Elena began her story, her voice quiet at first but growing stronger as she went. She described her mother's illness, Walter's increasing violence, the day her mother died. She described the beatings, the threats, the night she finally ran for her life. "And where did you go when you ran?" Crawford asked. "To Caleb Turner's ranch. I hid behind his barn. I thought I was going to die." Elena's eyes found Caleb's in the crowd. "But he found me instead, and he saved my life." "Objection," Walter's attorney drawled, dramatic and prejudicial. "Sustained," the judge said. "Stick to the facts, Mrs. Turner." Elena nodded and continued, describing the marriage, Walter's arrival at the ranch, the confrontation. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. He approached with a condescending smile that made Elena's skin crawl. "Mrs. Turner, isn't it true that you were angry at Mr. Moore for remarrying after your mother's death?" "He didn't remarry. My mother was his wife." "My apologies. Isn't it true you were angry that he inherited your mother's property?" "The property was obtained through coercion while my mother was dying." "But you have no proof of that, do you? Just your word against a respectable farmer." "I have the testimony of everyone who saw what he did," Elena said steadily. "I have medical records. I have the scars on my body from his beatings. How much proof do you need?" The attorney's smile faltered. "Isn't it true that you married Mr. Turner very quickly after meeting him? Within days, in fact." "Yes." "And isn't it possible that Mr. Turner coerced you into marriage, just as you claim Mr. Moore coerced your mother?" Elena felt anger flash through her. "Caleb Turner has never coerced me into anything. He offered me protection without asking for anything in return. He's given me the freedom to make my own choices about my own life. That's the opposite of what Walter Moore did." "But you barely knew him." "I knew him well enough to recognize a good man when I saw one," Elena interrupted. "I knew him well enough to trust him with my life. And I was right to trust him, because he's never once made me regret it." The attorney tried several more tactics, but Elena held firm, answering every question with the same calm certainty. She was telling the truth, and the truth had power that no amount of legal maneuvering could undermine. When she finally stepped down from the stand, Elena felt lighter somehow, as if testifying had released something she'd been carrying. Caleb squeezed her hand as she sat beside him, pride shining in his eyes. The trial continued for another day, closing arguments, jury deliberations. Elena and Caleb stayed in town at a small hotel, lying beside each other in the dark, hands clasped between them. "You were magnificent today," Caleb murmured. "Watching you face him down, refusing to be intimidated, I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." "I kept thinking about what you said," Elena replied, "that I wasn't doing this just for me. That made it easier somehow. Tomorrow it'll be over, one way or another. And then we go home," Elena said, "and start our real life together." "Our real life," Caleb repeated. "I like the sound of that." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, every face was grim. The foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Elena felt Caleb's arm come around her as relief and vindication washed through her in equal measure. Around the courtroom, people were nodding, a few even applauding before the judge called for order. Walter Moore sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in the territorial prison, to be served in full without possibility of parole. "This court finds that you abused your position of authority," the judge said sternly. "You terrorized women who had no recourse, who trusted the law to protect them and found themselves betrayed by that trust. You represent everything this court stands against. 25 years, and I wish I could make it longer." As they led Walter away in chains, he passed close to where Elena sat. For one moment, their eyes met. Elena saw him open his mouth, saw him prepare to spit one last insult, one final attempt to wound her. But before he could speak, Elena smiled at him. It was a small smile, almost pitying, because she'd won. She'd survived. She'd built a life worth living despite everything he'd done to break her, and he would spend the rest of his life in a cell, knowing that the girl he'd tried to destroy had triumphed over him completely. Walter's mouth closed. His shoulders slumped. And as the guards hauled him away, Elena Turner felt the last chains of her past finally break and fall away. She turned to Caleb, who was watching her with wonder and love in his eyes. "Let's go home," she said. And together they did. The wagon ride back to the ranch felt different from any journey Elena had made before. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue above them, the autumn air crisp with the promise of coming winter. And for the first time since she could remember, Elena felt truly free. Not running from something, but traveling toward home with a man she loved beside her. Caleb kept glancing at her as he drove, as if checking to make sure she was really there, really whole, really his. Each time their eyes met, he'd smile. Not the careful, cautious smiles of their early days, but something open and unguarded that made Elena's heart skip. "What are you thinking?" he asked as they crested the hill that overlooked his property. "Our property," Elena corrected gently, "and I'm thinking that I can't quite believe it's over, that Walter's locked away and can never hurt anyone again, that I'm going home to a place where I'm wanted." "More than wanted," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Loved, cherished, essential." The ranch came into view, and Elena felt something settle deep in her chest. The house with its wraparound porch, the barn where she'd first hidden in terror, the small schoolhouse she'd built from determination and hope, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. All of it was home now. Not a shelter or a hiding place, but genuinely home. Mrs. Chen must have been watching for them, because she burst from the house before the wagon had fully stopped. Her weathered face creased with joy. She pulled Elena into a fierce embrace, speaking rapidly in Cantonese. Elena still didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Welcome back. Well done. You're safe now." Pete and the other ranch hands gathered around asking about the trial, offering congratulations and support. Someone had prepared a celebration dinner, and the long table in the bunkhouse was laden with food and drink. It wasn't fancy, beef stew and fresh bread, apple pie made from the last of the autumn harvest, but it tasted like victory. "To Mrs. Turner," Pete said, raising his glass, "bravest woman in Montana territory." "To Elena," Caleb amended, his eyes holding hers across the table. Who taught us all what real courage looks like? The celebration lasted well into the evening, filled with laughter and stories, and the easy camaraderie of people who'd stood together through adversity. But eventually, the crowd dispersed to their own quarters, and Elena and Caleb found themselves alone on the porch under a sky full of stars. Tired? Caleb asked, noting the shadows under her eyes. Exhausted, Elena admitted, but the good kind. The kind that comes from finishing something hard rather than running from something terrible. They sat in their usual chairs, but tonight Caleb reached for her hand immediately, no hesitation. What happens now? He asked. What do you mean? I mean, Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. We've spent months focused on keeping you safe from Walter, on surviving the trial, on just getting through each day. Now that's done. We have a future to build instead of a crisis to manage. What do you want that future to look like? Elena considered the question, thinking about all the things she'd never allowed herself to dream about before. I want to keep teaching, she said slowly. The children need it, and I love watching them learn. But I'd like to expand, maybe. Teach some of the adults who never had the chance to learn their letters. That's a fine idea, Caleb said warmly. What else? I want to make this place feel more like mine too. Not just yours that you're sharing with me. I want to plant a garden in the spring, maybe get some chickens of my own to care for. Small things that make it feel like I belong here. You do belong here, Caleb said firmly. This is your home as much as mine. More, maybe, because you chose it when you had nothing. I was born to this land. You claimed it. Elena smiled at that. I want to write to my aunt in Denver, too. My mother's sister. I haven't seen her since I was 12, but I think she'd want to know I'm safe, that I'm married, that things turned out better than anyone could have expected. I'd like to meet her, Caleb said. Maybe invite her to visit in the spring. Really? Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest. You'd do that? Elena, she's your family. That makes her my family too. Caleb squeezed her hand. I want you to have all the things you missed out on. Family, connections, a life that's bigger than just survival. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Then Elena took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she wanted to say next. Caleb, I've been thinking about us, about this marriage. She felt him tense slightly beside her. What about it? When we married, it was an arrangement. Protection in exchange for, well, you never asked for anything in exchange, which was part of what made it safe. But now, Elena turned to face him fully. Now it's more than that, at least for me. And I want to make sure we're both clear about what we want going forward. Caleb's eyes searched her face in the starlight. What do you want, Elena? A real marriage, she said simply. Not just on paper, but in every way. I want to share a life with you, not just a house. I want... She faltered, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I want everything that marriage means, eventually, when I'm ready. When you're ready, Caleb repeated, and there was no pressure in his voice, only patience. Elena, I'll wait as long as you need. There's no rush. We've got the rest of our lives. But I don't want you to feel like you're just waiting, Elena said, frustrated with her own inability to articulate what she meant. I'm not asking for more time out of fear or uncertainty. I know what I want. I want you, fully, completely. I'm just asking for patience while I figure out how to get past the memories of what marriage meant with Walter in the house. The violence, the fear, the way he used my mother's exhaustion and illness against her. Understanding dawned in Caleb's expression. You're afraid that being intimate with me will remind you of him, of what you witnessed. Not exactly, Elena said slowly, working through her own thoughts. It's more that I've only ever seen marriage used as a weapon, as a way to control and hurt. I know intellectually that what we have is different, but I need time for my heart to catch up with my head. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Caleb said gently. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. Elena, there's no deadline on this. You set the pace and I'll follow. If that means we sleep in separate rooms for another year, that's fine. If it means we take things so slowly that snails pass us by, that's fine too. All I need is to know that you're here by choice and that someday, when you're truly ready, we'll have everything." "How did I get so lucky?" Elena whispered. "I ask myself the same thing every time I look at you," Caleb replied. "I found a terrified girl behind my barn and got a brave, brilliant woman for a wife. I'd say I'm the lucky one." That night, Elena lay in her bed thinking about the conversation. She'd been honest with Caleb, and he'd responded with exactly the patience and understanding she needed. But more than that, he'd given her the power to shape their future, to decide when and how their relationship would deepen. It was such a stark contrast to everything she'd known before. With Walter, there had been no choices, no agency, no respect for what anyone else wanted or needed. With Caleb, there was nothing but respect, even when it must be difficult for him to wait. The next morning, Elena woke to find frost on the windows and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She dressed warmly and emerged to find Caleb already gone to morning chores, but he'd left a note propped against her coffee cup. "Teaching today?" it read in his careful handwriting. "The Miller children asked Mrs. Chen if you'd be back in time for lessons. They missed you. We all did." "See," Elena smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. She did have lessons planned, and she'd missed her students during the 2 days they'd been gone for the trial. The children arrived promptly at 9, their faces bright with curiosity and questions. Elena had debated how much to tell them about where she'd been, but she decided on honesty. Age-appropriate, but honest. "I went to town to tell the truth about someone who hurt me," she explained. "It was scary, but important, and now that person can't hurt anyone anymore." "Was it the mean man who came here that day?" asked Timothy, one of the older boys. "Yes, but you don't need to worry about him. He's gone now, and he won't be coming back." "Because you were brave," said little Sarah, one of the youngest students. "My ma said you were the bravest lady she ever knew." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," she told them. "It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. And sometimes being brave means asking for help when you need it." The lesson that followed was one of the best she'd ever taught. The children were focused and engaged, asking thoughtful questions and working diligently on their assignments. Watching them bend over their slates, tongues poking out in concentration, Elena felt a profound sense of purpose. This was what she was meant to do, help these children build better futures than their parents had known. At noon, Caleb appeared in the doorway with lunch, sandwiches and apples packed in a basket. The children cheered at the sight of him, and he settled on the floor with them while they ate, listening to their chatter about what they were learning. "Mrs. Turner says I might be ready for multiplication soon," Timothy announced proudly. "That's excellent," Caleb said seriously. "Multiplication's useful for all kinds of things. Figuring out how many head of cattle you have, calculating wages, measuring land." "Will you teach me about cattle?" Timothy asked eagerly. "Tell you what, once you master multiplication, you come find me and I'll teach you everything I know about ranching." Caleb winked at Elena. "If your teacher says it's all right." "I think that's an excellent arrangement," Elena said, warmth spreading through her chest at seeing Caleb interact so naturally with the children. After the students left for the day, Caleb helped Elena clean the schoolroom. They worked in companionable silence, and Elena found herself watching him, the way he moved, the concentration on his face as he organized books, the gentleness with which he handled the children's slates. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Just thinking about what a good father you'd make," Elena said, then froze as she realized what she'd implied. Caleb's hand stilled on the slate he was holding. Are you saying you want children, someday?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I never let myself think about it before. But watching you with those kids today, seeing how patient and kind you are." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "I'd like children," Caleb said carefully, "if we're lucky enough to have them. But only when you're ready, Elena. Only when the idea of bringing a new life into this world feels like joy instead of fear." "What if I'm never ready?" Elena asked quietly. "What if the trauma is too deep?" "Then we'll have a good life anyway," Caleb said simply. "We'll teach other people's children, care for the families on this ranch, build something meaningful together. Children would be a blessing, but they're not the only path to a meaningful life." Elena crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. "How are you real?" she murmured. "I'm just a man who loves you," Caleb said, his arms coming around her. "Nothing more complicated than that." As October faded into November, life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Elena expanded her school to include evening classes for adults, ranch hands who'd never learned to read, women who wanted to improve their writing, anyone who wanted to better themselves. The schoolhouse became a hub of community, filled most hours of the day with the sound of learning and growth. Elena also began corresponding with her aunt in Denver, carefully penned letters that started with apologies for the long silence and grew into detailed accounts of her new life. Her aunt's responses were warm and overflowing with relief that Elena had escaped Walter and found happiness. She promised to visit in the spring, bringing Elena's young cousins to meet their new family. "I can't wait to meet them," Elena told Caleb as she read the latest letter. "My aunt says the oldest girl is 8 now. I haven't seen her since she was 3. "We'll prepare the guest room," Caleb said. "Make sure they have a proper Montana welcome." As winter approached, Elena found herself growing more comfortable with physical affection. She'd kiss Caleb goodbye in the mornings without hesitation now, would curl against him on the porch in the evenings when the cold drove them inside early. Small intimacies that once would have terrified her became natural, welcome. One snowy evening in December, nearly 6 months after their marriage, Elena found herself standing in the doorway between her room and Caleb's, looking at the separate spaces they'd maintained. Her room was soft and feminine, decorated with things Caleb had bought her: a mirror, a quilt, curtains she'd sewn herself. His room was simpler, more utilitarian, but it held the essence of him: books on ranching, his father's old rifle, a photograph of his sister. 2 separate lives under one roof. But they weren't separate lives anymore, were they? They were partners in everything but this one final intimacy. Elena took a deep breath and knocked on Caleb's door. "Come in," he called. She entered to find him sitting on his bed reading by lamplight, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He looked up in surprise when he saw her, quickly setting aside his book. "Elena, is everything all right?" "Yes," she said, then reconsidered. "No, I mean, nothing's wrong, but I need to tell you something." Caleb stood, concern evident on his face. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about waiting as long as I need, and I'm grateful for that, truly. But Caleb, I don't want to wait anymore." Elena's voice shook slightly, but she pressed on. "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything tonight, but I am saying I want to stop sleeping in separate rooms. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up beside you. I want to stop treating this marriage like it might end at any moment and start treating it like the permanent thing we both know it is." Caleb crossed to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind or step back. When he reached her, he cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure? Because once we start down this path, I don't want you to ever feel trapped or pressured. If you need to go back to your own room tomorrow or next week or next month, that has to be okay." "It will be okay," Elena promised, "because you're you, and you've never made me feel anything but safe." She placed her hands over his. "I love you, Caleb Turner, and I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. Maybe not all at once, but starting tonight, I want to try." Caleb's expression transformed, joy and desire and tenderness all mixing together. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Elena kissed him back with all the love and trust she'd been storing up for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We take this at your pace," he said firmly. "The moment you're uncomfortable, we stop. No questions, no pressure." "I know," Elena said. "That's why I'm not afraid." What followed was a night of gentleness and patience, of Caleb checking in constantly to make sure Elena was comfortable, of Elena discovering that intimacy could be beautiful instead of brutal when it was given freely rather than taken by force. There were moments when old fears surfaced and Caleb immediately backed off, holding her until she felt safe again. There were moments of awkwardness as they learned each other's bodies, as Elena learned to trust physical pleasure instead of fearing it. But mostly, there was love. Steady, patient, transformative love that healed old wounds even as it created new bonds. When Elena woke the next morning, she was curled against Caleb's side, his arm around her shoulders, winter sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she simply lay there, marveling at the absence of fear. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't waiting for punishment or pain. She was simply content. Caleb stirred beside her, his eyes opening to meet hers. "Good morning," he murmured, a smile playing at his lips. "How are you feeling?" "Happy," Elena said, testing the word. "Really, genuinely happy?" "Yeah." Caleb's smile widened. "Me too." They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking quietly about nothing and everything, reluctant to break the spell of the morning. But eventually responsibility called. Cattle needed tending, students needed teaching, life needed living. As they dressed, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the terrified girl who'd hidden behind the barn 6 months ago. This woman stood tall, her eyes clear and bright, her expression peaceful. This woman knew her own mind and heart. This woman had been through hell and emerged stronger for it. "You're staring," Caleb said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Elena said, leaning back against him. "For the better?" "For the better," Elena confirmed. "Definitely for the better." The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Christmas came, and Elena helped organize a celebration for the entire ranch community. Gifts for the children, a feast in the bunkhouse, carols sung around the fire. She'd never had a proper Christmas before, and experiencing it surrounded by people who cared about her was overwhelming in the best possible way. In January, Elena received word that her aunt would indeed visit in April, timing her trip for after the spring thaw made travel easier. The news sent Elena into a flurry of preparation, planning menus, organizing the guest room, nervously wondering if her aunt would approve of Caleb in her new life. "She'll love you," Caleb assured her one evening as Elena fretted over curtains for the guest room. "How could she not? You're brilliant and brave and building a life you're proud of. But what if she thinks I made a mistake marrying you so quickly? What if she's angry I didn't contact her sooner?" "Then we'll explain everything, and she'll understand," Caleb said calmly. "Elena, you survived something terrible and came out the other side. That's not something to apologize for." February brought a surprise. Elena realized with a mixture of shock and wonder that her monthly courses were late. Very late. She confided in Mrs. Chen, who smiled knowingly and began brewing special teas, muttering about morning sickness and cravings. Elena waited another 2 weeks before telling Caleb, wanting to be certain. But when her symptoms continued and Mrs. Chen confirmed her suspicions, Elena knew it was time. She found Caleb in the barn one evening, checking on a mare about to foal. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up the way it always did when he saw her. "Hey," he said warmly, "come to help with the watch?" "Actually, I came to tell you something," Elena said, her heart pounding. "Something important." Caleb's expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, just—" Elena took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant, Caleb. We're going to have a baby." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her, as if the words hadn't quite penetrated. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby?" he repeated wonderingly. You're really pregnant," Elena confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Mrs. Chen thinks I'm about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in September." Caleb crossed to her in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. Sorry. Should I not be doing that? Is spinning bad for pregnant women?" "Caleb, I'm fine," Elena laughed. "I'm not made of glass." I know, but—" He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby's in there. Our child. I want to keep you both safe." "We are safe," Elena said softly, covering his hand with hers. "Safer than I ever thought possible. This baby will be born into a home full of love, with parents who chose each other and choose them. That's more than most children get." "Are you happy about this?" Caleb asked, his eyes searching hers. "I know we talked about children being a someday thing." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Terrified of being a mother, of repeating my mother's mistakes, of not being enough." But Caleb, I'm also so happy I could burst. This baby, our baby, is proof that something beautiful can come from something that started in fear. That's powerful. They stood together in the barn, hands linked over the promise of new life, while the mare nickered softly nearby and the Montana winter wind howled outside. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Elena's body changed, her belly swelling with the growing life inside her. She continued teaching until she got too tired, then reduced her schedule to mornings only. Caleb became almost absurdly protective, insisting she rest more, eat more, let him handle any task more strenuous than walking. I'm pregnant, not dying, Elena protested one day when he tried to carry her from the schoolhouse to the main house. I know, I just want to make sure you and the baby have everything you need, Caleb said, looking so earnest that Elena couldn't stay annoyed. What I need is for you to stop treating me like I might break, Elena said, but she kissed him to soften the words. I promise to tell you if I need help, but for now I'm perfectly capable of walking 20 yards. April brought Elena's aunt Margaret and her two daughters, Rose and Lily. The reunion was tearful and joyful, with Margaret holding Elena tight and whispering apologies for not finding her sooner, for not knowing how bad things had gotten. I wrote to you, Margaret said, wiping her eyes, after your mother passed. But Walter sent back a letter saying you wanted no contact with your mother's family. I should have known something was wrong, should have come anyway. You couldn't have known, Elena said firmly. Walter was clever about isolating me, but I'm safe now, and we have a chance to rebuild our relationship. That's what matters. Margaret fell in love with Caleb immediately, declaring him a proper gentleman and approving wholeheartedly of the marriage. She was thrilled about the baby, immediately beginning to knit tiny garments and sharing advice from her own pregnancies. The cousins were fascinated by ranch life, and Elena enjoyed showing them her school and introducing them to the ranch children. Watching Rose and Lily play with the other children, Elena felt another piece of her past click into place. She had family again. Not just Caleb, but a wider circle of people who cared about her and wanted her in their lives. Summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Elena's belly grew round and full, and she felt the baby moving inside her, small flutters at first, then stronger kicks that made Caleb's face light up every time he felt them. Strong one, he'd say proudly, his hand on her stomach. Takes after their mother. Elena's students threw her a surprise party in August, presenting her with a cradle that Pete and the ranch hands had built from polished pine. It was beautiful, strong and sturdy, with rockers that moved smoothly and a small carving of a horse on the headboard. For the next generation of Turner ranchers, Pete said gruffly, looking pleased with himself. It's perfect, Elena said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you all so much. The baby came in mid-September, on a day when the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn gold. Elena's labor was long and difficult, but she had Caleb beside her the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Mrs. Chen served as midwife, her capable hands guiding Elena through each contraction with patience and expertise. When the baby finally arrived, a daughter with dark hair and her father's eyes, Elena held her and wept with joy and relief and exhaustion all mixed together. She's perfect, Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his daughter. You're both perfect. They named her Sarah, after Caleb's sister. Sarah Turner, born into love and safety, and everything her namesake had been denied. The first weeks with a newborn were challenging, sleepless nights, endless feedings, the constant worry that came with being responsible for such a tiny, vulnerable life. But they navigated it together, Caleb taking night shifts so Elena could rest, Elena teaching Caleb how to swaddle and burp and soothe their daughter's cries. I never knew I could love anything this much, Caleb said one night, rocking Sarah while Elena dozed on the bed. Except maybe you. Elena smiled sleepily. We made her. This tiny, perfect person came from us. Best thing I ever did, Caleb said, looking down at his daughter's sleeping face. Second best was marrying you. As autumn deepened into winter again, Elena found herself reflecting on the year that had passed. 12 months ago, she'd been testifying against Walter Moore, terrified but determined. Now she was a mother, a wife, a teacher, and a woman who'd finally found her place in the world. One evening in late November, almost a year and a half since she'd first hidden behind Caleb's barn, Elena stood on the porch with Sarah bundled against the cold. Caleb came up beside her, wrapping his arm around both of them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far I've traveled," Elena said softly. "Not in miles, but in every other way that matters. I was a girl running for her life. Now I'm a woman with a home, a family, a purpose. Sometimes I still can't quite believe it's real." "It's real," Caleb promised, kissing her temple. "You're here, I'm here, Sarah's here. We built this together, and nothing's going to take it away." "I know," Elena said. "That's what makes it so incredible. I'm not hiding anymore, Caleb. I'm not running or afraid or waiting for disaster. I'm just living, genuinely, fully living." "You deserve it," Caleb said firmly. "You deserve every bit of happiness this life brings you." Elena looked out at the ranch, at the land she'd claimed not through birth or inheritance, but through courage and perseverance. She thought about her students waiting for her return in the spring, about her aunt planning another visit, about Mrs. Chen teaching her recipes and baby care in equal measure, about Pete and the ranch hands who'd become the brothers she'd never had. She thought about Walter Moore, locked away in a cell where he could never hurt anyone again. She'd won. Not just survived, but triumphed, built a life so full and beautiful that the girl she'd been would never have dared to dream it. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked suddenly. "Finding me that day? Your life was simple before I arrived." "My life was empty before you arrived," Caleb corrected. "I was going through the motions, living but not really alive. You brought purpose, joy, love, everything that matters. Regret you? Elena, finding you behind that barn was the luckiest moment of my life." Sarah stirred in Elena's arms, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon and want to nurse. Elena looked down at her daughter's perfect face and felt her heart swell almost painfully with love. "She'll never know fear the way I did," Elena said quietly. "She'll grow up knowing she's loved and wanted and safe, that she has choices and power over her own life. Because of you," Caleb said. "Because you survived and fought and refused to let trauma define you. You're giving our daughter the childhood you deserved but never got." "We're giving her that," Elena corrected. "Together." As the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elena Turner stood with her husband and daughter and felt peace settle over her like a benediction. The journey from that terrified girl behind the barn to this moment had been long and painful, but it had been worth every tear, every fear, every moment of doubt. She'd been found when she was lost, protected when she was vulnerable, chosen when she felt worthless. And in return, she'd built a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a future bright with possibility. The girl who'd hidden behind the barn believing she was unwanted was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd claimed her power, who'd transformed survival into triumph. Elena Turner was home. Finally, truly, forever home. And as she carried her daughter inside with Caleb's arm warm around her shoulders, Elena smiled at the life they'd built together, a life born from compassion, nurtured by patience, and sustained by the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. This was her story, not a tale of victimhood, but a testament to resilience, not an ending, but a beginning that would continue to unfold with each new day, each new choice, each new moment of joy wrested from the ashes of trauma. She'd been broken, and she'd healed. She'd been lost, and she'd been found. She'd been afraid, and she'd learned courage. Most importantly, she had been chosen, not as property or obligation, but as partner, wife, mother, and beloved. Chosen freely by a man who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. And in choosing to stay, to build, to love despite everything she'd endured, Elena had chosen herself too. Had chosen healing over bitterness, hope over despair, life over mere existence. As winter settled over the ranch and the first snow began to fall, the Turner family gathered around their fire, Caleb, Elena, and baby Sarah, together against whatever the world might bring. 3 hearts beating as one, 3 lives intertwined by choice and love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The cowboy had chosen the bride no one wanted, and what she'd given him, courage, purpose, love, and life, had changed everything. Not just for him, but for everyone whose life she touched with her determination to transform pain into possibility. This was their story, and it was only just beginning.